Welcome to Boom, where we have biomechanics on our minds.
Boom.
Boom.
Boom, boom, boom.
Boom, 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 boom.
Boom.
Welcome back to Boom. We're so excited to be here with Professor Martha Hall. Martha is an assistant professor and director of innovation for the College of Health Sciences, and she covers many other departments. She's in fashion and apparel, entrepreneurship, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, computer engineering, and biomechanics are one of our favorites, all at the University of Delaware. And we're so excited to have her here because, as you could hear, she has a very interdisciplinary background, and she's doing something Melissa and I both really admire, bringing scientific innovation together with compassionate design to create human-centered solutions. So we're really excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us, Martha.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you. We are excited to first get a little bit of background on your story and when you first knew that you wanted to be a biomechanist, and then probably what everyone's wondering now, given that that introduction, is how did you then start to combine fashion and biomechanics and all of these different areas together?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot because it's a very unusual situation. So what inspired my journey was when I was doing my master's degree in fashion design. And even before that, when I was an undergraduate in fashion, I had this concept that I was going to be in New York and I was going to do the catwalks, and I was going to not the catwalks, but I was going to be a designer in New York and kind of follow that whole trajectory that we kind of think about as kind of the stereotypical outcome for going into apparel design and fashion. And then it was during my master's program that just randomly I was invited to a talk given by Dr. Cole Galloway. So if you're not familiar with his work, I highly, highly recommend Googling Go Baby Go, which was his research group at the time. And Dr. Galloway is a pediatric PT. And he was giving a talk about assistive technology, user-centered design, really the social justice model of, creating products that are family-centered and child-friendly. And he was talking in this kind of TED Talk format about how children, he worked with babies and toddlers who, for whatever reason, had mobility challenges. And he was talking about how connected our mobility is to cognition development. And that as you're delayed with your motor development, you're at risk for developmental delays cognitively. And so a child is not eligible for a wheelchair until they're age 5. And so you have 5 years of falling behind your peers. And so he was like, this is crazy. Why do we have this system? And so he went to what was then Toys R Us and got, there's like a Barbie ride-on Jeep or a Lightning McQueen car, and completely retrofitted it out to be a support mobility device for babies and toddlers so that these babies could be comfortable. They had the structure to support their bodies, and they could explore their world. And they could, he talks a lot about how mobility is a human right. And at the end of his talk, and when I was listening to his talk, I didn't have a background in PT. I don't consider myself like a baby person. It was completely out of my element. And he was talking at the end about, why don't we have this kind of technology in a lot of different form factors, including fashion? And he just kind of whimsically said that. He's like, for example, your sweatshirt could have, integrated parts that help you move and play. And as soon as he was done talking, I a beeline right to him, and I was like, Dr. Galloway, I'm Martha Hall. I want to volunteer. I don't know what I can do to help you, but I know. So.
But I'm here for it.
Yeah. And that was the pivotal moment. And then what really solidified things for me is the first time. So the first project I worked on with him was with Dr. Lobo, who at the time was a research scientist in his lab. And she was doing the same kind of assistive technology development for upper extremity. And so we were working on developing some sort of device that would help a child, 3 months to 18 months, move their arms. So for children who, for whatever reason, couldn't move their arms. And so again, they're at risk for delays. They're at risk for, not being able to do their activities of daily living, like learning to feed and all of that. The first time I made a device and a baby was able to move and do all this stuff on their own, I was like, that's a game changer. I don't know what this career is going to look like, but I've got to pivot and I've got to go down this path. And so, I very quickly started my biomechanics journey and forged this concept of wearables, health, engineering, user-centered design, empathy, to really kind of create a new path for myself. And my hope is I'm in some small way doing the same for my students now, to see a different way of going about design.
That's a beautiful journey, and so amazing to have like that one pivotal moment that really that you had the courage to follow and really pursue.
Oh, it definitely was very scary. I mean, when I applied for the biomechanics program, as a fashion designer, as my background, it was like I had to say that I had to kind of confront the elephant in the room. It's like, why do you want to be here? This is so not, your training. And so I learned through that process and with interacting with my peers and interacting with faculty to understand how I added value to the biomechanics world. So how can I contribute with my toolbox, with, my background discipline? How can I speak the language and insert kind of what do I bring to the table? But yeah, it definitely was an interesting journey.
Can you talk more about that? Because I think fashion is such an amazing example, because I think sometimes we're like, oh, I'm in computer science, I don't think I can be an bioengineer. Like the fields that they're much more similar than fashion. And to me, it's so inspiring to see you do that. And I think know yourself so well and the value that you bring. And I'm curious, when you're asked, how did your perspective as having this background in fashion really add to your career in engineering? What types of things do you talk about?
Yeah. So basically I talk a lot about, again, kind of what fashion brings to the table and how, at its root, what is fashion and what does it add to the design process? And so, for me, a lot of the looking at wearables, you can strip it down to like really thinking about fit, really thinking about comfort, really thinking about the user experience, the human body interface with a device. All of that is extremely important, and you learn that in a fashion realm. You learn that, and so, being in a bubble in fashion, I was thinking, as I mentioned earlier, about this career in ready to wear and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's super fun to make a cocktail dress, but you're not going to change someone's quality of life necessarily, or their level of independence. And so, when I was able to see that the skill set that I learned and some of the approaches that I had from a fashion design perspective could add value to someone's life, improve their mobility, as I shared before, their independence, their level of dignity, just being able to, don and doff a garment independently without the assistance of a caregiver. I mean, that's all very exciting example of how these areas can merge. And I get all the time with students who are like, I have very, discordant things that I'm interested in, or I'm all over the place with what I want to do. And it's like, well, most of the world outside of college is interdisciplinary. Like we get in this kind of little track, when we're in school, and we think about your major or your grad program or whatever it is, and all of the very narrowly defined careers that are related to that. But once you leave that environment, and get out into, I hate this expression, but the real world, you get out into working with industry or working with other people in a nonprofit or what have you, you find that an interdisciplinary approach is key. You can't be so narrowly defined that you can't have a broader perspective, or at the very least, being interdisciplinary yourself helps you engage with other people from other disciplines, which again is completely normal for most jobs. So I think having this background has helped me show people how to merge different things and how they can go together. But also tell the story of, not necessarily what I do, but something that combines these different elements is going to be a pivotal or a very important part of your career path, and having that skill set, I think is really important.
That's awesome. And I think it's so true that I feel like sometimes it's like easier for your brain to like just narrow and like figure out one thing, but then really working to actually integrate and be interdisciplinary is such an important skill.
Yeah.
And maybe one that's not really taught.
Yeah, and I think too, it's also messy and fuzzy, and people don't like that.
Yeah.
It's very safe
Exactly.
to be in like your track. You know what to do, and you know how to answer the problem. I mean, one of the things, just a quick anecdote, one of the things that really showed that to me is when I was first interacting with these different participants and working with families, just being fresh out of fashion school, my approach to problem solving was like, I'm the designer. I know what I'm talking about. This is what you need. Here you go use it. And it's like, no, you can't function that way. And not only that, but as a designer, you also can't have what I call the Gollum syndrome, which is a nerdy Lord of the Ring reference, but is a this kind of precious baby element with your designs. Like you're not able to let it have that risk to let it fail, or risk to not being perfect the first time out. So, I think having those, sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Well, I'm picturing Gollum right now. So
as soon as I said that, I was like, yeah, sorry.
No, I think that's really helpful with what you're saying with making sure that you're not, I think when you have that, this is my precious project, then it's really hard to take in new ideas and bring in new perspectives. And also I think take feedback as something constructive and positive rather than feeling defensive about it. So I think I haven't heard it called that before, but I think we can coin that term.
You're being Gollum right now.
Yeah, and so you just reminded me. So that's why, like, if you have this precious thoughts about your project, you really aren't open to letting the participant be the expert. And so I can't walk into a design problem and say, I know what I'm doing because I'm a designer, yada, yada, yada. The patient is the expert. The caregiver is the expert. The provider is the expert. Like, you are using your toolbox to answer the problem and come up with a solution, but you are not an expert in someone else's lived experience. So that's why the empathy piece is extremely important.
Yeah, and that's definitely like, Melissa and I have been lucky to take some design classes, and I think they're really good at teaching that. And I feel like that was just a whole different perspective than the engineering approach that we taught in other classes. So it's nice. It's cool that that's something you brought over from fashion. I'm wondering if there are other things that you brought from fashion, like in what, I could imagine that in these conversations with all these different disciplines, like there's probably some surprise or even resistance to some of the things you're.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So one, like, would you mind sharing like an example of that, or and how you sort of worked through it? Like, how do you kind of integrate well and bring these different perspectives?
Sure. So I can give an example of, kind of some challenges, and then something that I bring to the table that kind of put that on its head, I think, for people, or help other people understand. Again, going back to my graduate school experience, often people, when they first hear that you're in fashion, that there's kind of a stereotype of what you do is very fluffy. I got that a lot.
Yep.
What you do is very artsy. Why do we care about aesthetics? We're in, especially where I was being trained in a physical therapy environment, the focus is on function. And especially, again, with the engineering approach too, like your focus is to improve patient function. Your focus isn't to make it look cute. And so I got a lot of jokes about like, oh, you want to put glitter on this scoliosis brace, I bet. And I was just like, no, that's not what
unless they want glitter.
Did they ask for glitter?
But what I would say is that, from fashion, social psychology is incredibly important when you think about things that we wear. And so if you think of someone who has a disability, if you think of someone who has a chronic illness or a chronic disease, and if they have any kind of thing that they are wearing to help promote that ability or mobility or independence, there's a sense, people need to feel a sense of they're themselves. So meaning if you have an acquired disability, say you had some sort of trauma or you had some sort of illness, and it kind of changed your lifestyle and your life pattern and what you needed for assistance, all of a sudden having devices that you need to use, different kinds of clothing that may not express who you are, how you feel about yourself, all of these items, all of these wearables convey information about how you see yourself, and even more so how you want to be treated by other people. And that's just the reality of our culture. And so, me explaining to people, the aesthetics of a device. So going back to the scoliosis race, the aesthetics of that device are important because not only does it give you a sense of, buy-in, like the patient would be like, okay, this looks like something that might help me. And so there's an essential appeal to it. But when I wear it, do I still feel like I'm reflecting my sense of self and my self-concept? And so as I started to share that, it became much more understandable that, yeah, fashion may feel fluffy, but there's a lot to it. There's a science to it. There's an engineering to it. I had a former mentor who used to call herself an apparel engineer, just for that very reason, to try to give people a different point of view when they met her. And I think that was brilliant. And I do that all the time with my students. Is like, that's what we're combining here, is we're combining that social psych piece, that comfort piece, that fitting and interface piece with functionality.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And I think sometimes in engineering, it's kind of in my experience, has been the extreme where a lot of times we don't think about fashion, or if you do think about fashion, maybe it's like you don't care enough about science then, or some, know, and it's amazing, I think, because I think what you're saying is, with what we're wearing, it is an expression of ourselves, and it can either make us feel more like ourselves or it can make us feel disconnected to ourselves. And I think for what it sounds like what you're saying is particularly for people with movement disorders and, needing to wear something to help with that, wanting to still feel authentic and like they're able to express themselves in the way they want. And that I feel like as able bodies, we're able to do that much easier and really have that choice. And so it sounds just like so powerful that you're able to help people feel empowered with what they're wearing and have it feel more connected with who they are, because then I think they would want to wear, I work with people with osteoarthritis, and I've heard people say, the brace helps me, but I don't want to wear it because it's bulky and it looks weird and it draws attention to myself. And, they don't want to, they don't then want to use it, even though it might be helpful for them.
Well, and then they become like non-compliant or a bad patient. And it's like, then you're putting the blame on the patient, that there's something wrong with that person, or that they don't want to wear the device. Don't you know it's going to improve your function? Don't you know it's going to help you? And it's like, well, why don't we revisit the device? Why don't we revisit that social psych piece that's inhibiting someone to want to wear it? And so maybe we can streamline it. Maybe we can, change the color or change the material so that it feels more comfortable, both physically and psychologically.
Can you share more about some of the projects that you're working on currently, maybe a couple that you're most excited about?
Yes. I actually brought props, which I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes. Now we have a YouTube channel, so we'll be able to show some video clips, which is awesome.
Okay. So I will explain it out, but I will show you some stuff. So I just brought a handful of things. So, my grad students get on my case about this all the time. I have so many studies going on at the same time. So I usually have between 20 or 30 projects going on at the same time. And
How many students do you have?
This semester, it's a good question. This semester I have 80 undergraduates, and
You
so
manage 80 undergraduates.
it's quite a lot. Not so many graduate students because I try to give them more personal attention, but there's a lot happening. And as you can see, like I like to have my hands in a lot of pies. So the projects that we work on are in this, as I said before, this kind of wearables for health space. Mm-hmm. So that could be clothing related, that really pulls at my heartstrings from a fashion point of view. It can be medical device related. We do a lot of sports rehab devices. And then we do a lot of protective equipment and things like that. So I brought some props to show you examples of those that I'm excited about. So the first one, all right, so this is a pair, I'm not going to name drop labels, but this is a pair of jeans that were made for someone with a disability. Now, the challenge, designers are starting to get in the space, like bigger apparel brands, which is awesome, but they often don't think about the problem holistically. And I would say they don't think about the empathy piece. And so, for example, this is a pair of pants that are intended for a child with cerebral palsy. Now, a lot of kids who have CP have fine motor challenges or wear leg braces, amongst other things. So it's great that there's a Velcro and a magnet here, so that helps a little bit. There's also magnets at the bottom to accommodate an ankle foot orthosis or leg brace, which is great. The challenge is there's zero stretch in these pants. Like they don't stretch at all. And these are also skinny leg jeans. So for a child with a foot, with an ankle brace, they most likely won't be able to put a pair of skinny jeans on. Another example, I'm going to hide the logo. Not really doing a good job.
Sounds a little hard to
We'll put a black box over it.
Okay. Another example. Again, the intention is amazing because footwear is a huge problem for a lot of people. This was a pair of shoes initially, same population, intended for individuals with CP, that they could independently put on and take off. But so there's this Velcro strap, and then you pull it around the back to slip your foot in. Which is, again, it's a cool concept, but if you actually put this into practice, nobody in that population would be able to do this on their own. So there's strides happening in this space, which is really, really exciting. And I don't want to, I don't want to hate on either of these brands because I think it's amazing that they're in the space in general. But there's so much more that can be done, which is exciting to see. So another example. So this is an AFO that we designed. So an AFO is an ankle foot orthosis. So it typically keeps your foot at a 90-degree angle. And it often, there's a lot of different populations that need these. It could be someone who's had a stroke. It could be someone who, for whatever issue, has foot drop. It could be for a lot of different kids and adults. And they tend to be really bulky, really difficult, really heavy, really difficult to fit in your shoe. You often have to buy a shoe size that's 2 to 3 sizes bigger than your actual foot size, which leads to a tripping hazard. It can also kind of cause a Frankenstein effect with your gait pattern. So this one, we actually 3D printed a scan of an insole for someone's sneaker, and then created what we've called a passive dynamic AFO. So these ridges allow for flexibility in the toe, and these are all piano wires that create a spring effect. So it actually helps to propel your foot forward. And then the last piece is a one-handed magnetic clasp, so that if you have had a stroke and you have hemiplegia, you're able to get in and out of your AFO without assistance.
It's amazing to see all these parts combined into one device, and that you're thinking about all of these different components of it. I think what you said before about this holistic approach, where it's not just about trying to fix one issue, not just trying to fix foot drop or something like that. It's really thinking about when the person who's going to be using this device is trying to use it, what are all of the things that they're going to be thinking and needing to do, and seeing that come through in your designs is really amazing.
Yeah, thank you. And a lot of it too is because of the students. So the students, all 80 of them, come from different majors. And so the fact that I've got students, and that was part of, the reason why I'm so blessed to be in a lot of different departments or be affiliated with a lot of different departments, is it allows me to have students from those departments come to my lab. And I find that teams of interdisciplinary students are doing exactly what I did as a fashion person in a biomechanics and PT lab. They're coming at a problem from really different perspectives. And so, a physics major, a material science major, a fine arts major, they're going to have a completely unique approach and different skills to bring to the table. So I think a huge part of kind of this broader thinking, especially with how can we solve the problem, is everybody's coming from a different place. And so it helps us with our projects get into the headspace of the user a little bit easier, because we're not constrained by what we think we know.
Yeah.
So I have a couple more. Is it okay to keep going?
Yes, please.
Please, yeah.
Okay.
That's awesome.
So I don't know if you can see this, but this is a 3D scan of an individual who's well-known basketball player who had a occipital bone injury and needed a protective face mask. So typically, I should have brought a typical one, but typically face masks are clear polycarbonate. They have kind of a peaked nose, Velcro strap. They fog up very easily. They tend to be very small because it's a one-size-fits-all device. And so for this person, I was collaborating with a prosthetist who is affiliated with my university, and we created a face mask for him that perfectly fit his face and allowed for him to have the comfort of something that was custom fitted, but also it has a blend of carbon fiber with the polymer. It's 3D printed. And it had the aesthetic he was interested in, because he was interested in a Black Panther inspired mask. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But it was just a really exciting, opportunity to get into a whole different area. And when we were talking earlier about like non-compliant patients, athletics has been such a fascinating area to get involved with, because the players are so hypersensitive, for good reason, hypersensitive about what they're wearing during gameplay, during practice, because they don't want anything that's going to affect their ability to perform at whatever their baseline performance is. So it's kind of taken the user-centered design process and put it under a really fine microscope, because there's just very little room for there's a lot of constraints, but it's been exciting to be a part of that. And then the last thing, I'm going to model it here. So this is...
So you have a sleeve, yeah.
Yeah, that's a sleeve. So it's a sleeve that has different stitch patterns. So we have, not to
a sleeve
geek
on your
out
arm,
about...
just for people who are listening.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. There's a sleeve on my arm. And not to geek out too much about fabrics and materials, but it's a knitted sleeve. So it's something that would be comparable to a very fine sweater, like fine. And this sleeve has different patterns. So you can see there's different patterns for the joint area of the arm, and there's different patterns for like the forearm and the bicep. And so this is actually made of Kevlar. So we had a exciting collaboration with some active military to create a bulletproof long underwear, which we have successfully done. And so, so this can be made into any any shape and size. Our next
sounds like
exciting,
Yeah.
yeah, we're making superhero outfits.
Yeah.
Watch out. So our next kind of application for this, after we finish all of our material testing, is kind of an interesting one. We are working with our local university police force and with their training dogs. So their canine unit, and making bulletproof long underwear for German Shepherds. So you never know.
Wow. Wow.
You never know what kind of project will come down your path.
How do you find these different projects? Do people come to you and they just know of your work, or how are you finding all these
interesting,
such a diverse applications for for your skill set?
It happens in two different ways. So the most common is I get contacted by an organization. So being in Delaware, I don't know if either of you have been to Delaware, but it's a small state and everybody knows everybody. So,
I've only met one person from Delaware before, and I was like, is that a place? It just seems like I've never been there.
Yeah. And so because of that, it allows for people to get to know each other pretty quickly. Like there's a community here. And Philly's really close, New York's really close, Baltimore's really close. So I'll have organizations such as Easter Seals, or we have an amazing hospital called A.I. DuPont Hospital for Children that's located in Delaware. It's like a mecca for all different types of diagnoses, sports teams, things like that. So because of that small community, I get contacted a lot as people kind of hear about my work. The other avenue is that if I or a student, more often a student, comes up with an idea, like they want to do X project or they want to make a certain widget, we very quickly vet the process in a year-long qualitative study process to really understand the user that the student is inspired by. So we never assume that we know, what I was talking about before, like understanding someone's lived experience. So someone may come to me, a student may come to me inspired, like, I want to make this, or this would be so cool if this existed. And it's like, well, is that actually a problem? Do people need that? Yeah. And so we go out into the community, talk to stakeholders, talk to caregivers, talk to participants, to try to understand if it really is a need. If it really is a need, then there becomes a participatory design process with those stakeholders, and they help fuel the project, they help drive it. They become the population that we do trials with once it's ready. So that's kind of, it usually happens either way like that.
And that's a year long. Is our students, I guess, as excited about that as you are when it comes to, it seems like a long time. And I guess I'm thinking like, kind of like how you teach how to do that. Cause it's also not a skill, I think, that comes naturally for engineers too. And thinking about doing that. And then you're, sharing, we should spend a year doing this qualitative research. And what is that like, trying to guide people through that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had students students surprise me all the time. Like I always think with engineers, they just want to make stuff, or exercise science people want to do PT intervention or something. Like I tend to assume that people in different majors are kind of the amalgamation of their major. But truthfully, once we explain, like, no, we need to actually understand this, and we need to get out there and understand this, I've never had pushback from any of the students. They get very excited because it's getting them out of the classroom, for one thing, and it's getting them out into the community. They see impact that they're having, their potential for impact, even though it's the beginning of a project. And also, projects are in all different phases at all different times. So the 20 to 30 projects, there may be like a handful that are in this qualitative space. There could be a handful that are in the ideation space. There could be a handful that are in the prototyping space. So students can also kind of gravitate towards what type of experience they want to have. But the qualitative piece is extremely important to me. And actually, Stanford's D School is where I was trained, or not, read extensively and had a lot of mentors who helped mold that that approach and process. And I've tried to do that with my students. And it's key. It's key. We can't just make stuff in a vacuum.
100%. And I think I'm interested in, we've talked a lot about the design process and like the importance of empathizing and defining a good problem, which I think is so, essential in research and science and in translation. But you're also a professor in the entrepreneurship program, and I know you're involved with entrepreneurship other programs. So I'm wondering, what is that piece like? Like, I feel like that's a piece I don't know anything about, and I'm wondering, what is that piece? How do you push it beyond, okay, we made a cool product, how do you actually get it?
Yep. So great question. So that was inspired. I was not a business person either. So like I had like in high school, I had a business and I would just give stuff away. Like it really wasn't a good business model, so I never had that kind of background. But when I was doing my doctoral work and I saw kind of the grant system and what is motivating or how faculty are incentivized. Mm-hmm. Mostly that grant system is really baked into the structure. And having a project that spans a grant and then you move on to the next grant, you move on to the next grant. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there could be a deliverable or an outcome that could be a product that the professor is not set up or necessarily inclined to want to spin out a business around it, but they have the clinical data that supports it. And so there's huge opportunity with academic researchers to have someone kind of help them take it for them. Mm-hmm. So what I've done, I've used that as kind of an inspiration with my lab, every product that we develop, we tell our internal tech transfer office. So every university has, is there new IP being generated? So I let them know. We go over the data, go over the product. Is it really novel? And then I've started a company with the help of Five Lights group, and it's been an amazing process. I've started a company that sole purpose is to commercialize the IP that's generated by my lab. And in part of that, the mission, so my mission in my lab, is to help quality of life, help independence, and make things accessible. The mission of the company is the same. So whatever comes out for commercialization has to be cost effective, has to be easy to get, has to be well researched, so it's actually solving a problem. It has to follow all of those values. And then all of my students, any student that's on any of those projects that becomes a novel IP is a co-inventor. So they get credit. So I'm also very transparent that this is not the Martha Hall show. It's not just one person doing everything. It's a huge team of people doing amazing work, and they should get credit. They should get compensation if something gets picked up, by a bigger company. The whole point is translation. So it's been an interesting journey, as I said. It's because I don't come from a business background, but I kind of think of it as a social entrepreneurship model because the goal, yes, I want the company to do well, but the goal is really to get the products in the hands of the people who were in that year-long qualitative study phase. Otherwise, I feel like it's so unfair to be making things and then people can't get them. Like if you create something, like if we create an AFO that works, and it's better than something, it needs to get out there. So it is a challenge. It works well for me because I'm this weird kind of unicorn faculty member, but I would encourage either companies out there or faculty to consider, either reaching to an institution to help faculty get it out, or for faculty to seek out support to translate their research into the community.
Mm. And you said people can do that either through companies or find resources in their department. Is there any other advice that you would give to people, maybe about kind of from your experience, the impact it's made to make the extra effort and time to see it translated? What types of benefits that has as a researcher?
Mm-hmm. So I'll go back kind of full circle to my original mentor, Cole Galloway. So one of the things that he pushed with me is don't go for incremental change, go for leaps and bounds in change. And so I think as faculty and as researchers, we're kind of, it's okay to do incremental change. You kind of have a niche thing you're doing and you kind of, plug away at it and try to make inroads. But if we can incentivize faculty that innovation, true transformation is something that should be their legacy, and there's opportunities to support that, whether it doesn't have to be a company per se. It could be helping to develop a nonprofit, helping to develop, something that at least is translating their work. Until we change that kind of internal academic system, it's going to be really challenging. But I would just urge faculty to consider, what do you want your legacy to be? Do you want it to be, I got from here to here, so I'm doing an inch? Or I got from here to here, you know what I mean?
Off the screen. Yeah, we can't even see it.
Yeah, so big.
Wow. Well, I feel like we could talk to you forever. This is like so exciting and so inspiring.
Yes.
And
thank you.
Yeah, it's just been such a lovely conversation. And I think we only have a couple questions left. I think our first is one we love to ask. What is a time in your career where you feel like you failed? And sometimes people feel like, nothing is really a failure because you can learn from it, which I think is a healthy mindset too. But take that question however you'd like. There's an experience you'd like to share with us.
So one example that just comes to mind immediately is, we were talking earlier about feeling like when you're in school, you're on a track, and you have an interest in something. There's specific steps you need to take to get there, and then you get there, and it's awesome, and you're going to be fulfilled and happy, and everything's going to be magical. When I was doing fashion, I thought at one point, maybe working in a museum or doing something where I was, curating these beautiful gowns from Dior or what have you. And so I thought that would be this amazing job. And I think a lot of times, putting myself in that perspective as a student, you don't know what a job's going to be like until you do the job. And you often romanticize that job. At least I do. I tend to think of this perfect scenario of what it is. And it may not be at all what you think it is. And so when I did my first costume museum internship and I was alone in a vault picking bugs out of an old dress, I was like, what am I doing? This is not at all what I want to be doing with my life. And so I was like, there's got to be a way, in hindsight, there's a way to apply that interest and that joy that I have for craftsmanship and design in other ways. So was it a failure? I mean, I thought it was frustrating to think that I had gone so far in my schooling and I wasn't going to do, what I thought I was wanting to do. And it's hard. You take that personally, or I do take it really personally. Like there's something wrong with me that I don't feel like this is right. But if it doesn't feel right, go with your gut. And for the career that I have now, I'm really, really glad that I'm not back in that vault and still doing that and took a leap of faith. So.
Well, I think I can speak for many, many people when I say that we're also glad that you're not in that vault. And not only because of all the amazing things that have come from your work, but just the person that you are and how inspiring I think you've been to so many people and showing them that there's more than just the traditional path that oftentimes we think is laid out for us, and to just sort of expand our imagination of what's possible. So we have really appreciated you sharing that story with us, that it wasn't always like that necessarily, but to see where you've come from, that is amazing. And as our last question, we'd like to ask what you are most excited about for the future of, well, I guess so many different areas, but sort of this integration of biomechanics and fashion and wearables. Where are you most excited to see that going?
I think for me, I really want to create a new either, undergraduate program, graduate program, or show industry people a new field of study that combines all these different things. Because I've had so many students who want to do what I do, or like, what kind of job can I get when I do what you do? And it's like, well, we're really kind of forging new territory here. And so I would love to have an opportunity to, teach more students this interdisciplinary approach. And even if they don't go into that as a career, I've found that just having students understand an empathy-driven process makes them a nicer human, makes them a good person, or helps them be a good person. So that's something I'm excited about, to try to get that kind of groundswell to recognize that this is an emerging space. And then also to show industry, again, they don't have to be in buckets. Like, they don't have to be on these tracks with fashion just being this and medical device design just being this. Like, there's a different way of approaching it. So what I'm most excited about is hopefully creating some change, whether that's in teaching new students or helping to educate industry to think a little bit broadly about how we can go about solving these health problems.
Well, we hope that's the future too. Like, I know Melissa and I have talked so many times about this boundary that feels like this boundary you've got to keep in your industry, and we're so excited about a future that integrates both. And we were just talking last night about why is there not a lab that is has two PIs and or just all these different things. So it's so exciting to hear your answer and hear you imagine that.
Yeah, and this idea of so many siloed departments, and you're going into this track or this track, and I think something we're excited about too is just not having those walls anymore. And so I think it's cool to see you live that out in your work, and also thinking about how you can not just do that in your work, but then start to change things more within academics more generally, and that's really exciting too. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us and helping us think more broadly and expand our bubbles. We've heard a lot about biomechanics and integrating fashion with that, and entrepreneurship is something that we haven't covered yet. So we're so grateful for all of your insights.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you again for this opportunity. It's great to share a story and just hope it inspires other people to try new things and combine new things. So thank you for inviting me.
You definitely inspired at least 2 people.
World domination.
Pyramid,
yeah.
Thanks.
Biomechanics off our minds.